Odysseus is a hero remembered with both admiration and revulsion. Legends celebrate his intelligence and bravery, but behind every cunning plan lies selfishness, betrayal, and cruelty. In this narrative, we will look beyond the glittering mask of the Greek king and see why he became one of the most hated heroes of all time. In the days when the sea winds were still young and the waves knew the names of the gods, the rocky land of Ithaca was ruled by King Laertes, wise, strong, yet indifferent to glory. His wife, Anticlea, daughter of the cunning Autolycus, carried within her the seed of the future hero. They say that when the time came for her to give birth, the night was moonless, and the sea, which usually roared at the foot of the cliffs, suddenly fell silent, as if listening to the breath of fate. And the child was born. His eyes were clear like the morning star above the sea. The elder Autolycus arrived from the mainland to see his grandson, and looking at the infant said, "His name will be Odysseus, for fate will lay upon him burdens and trials, and he will grieve many. Yet with his mind he will overcome storms and destiny." Thus he was named Odysseus, meaning he who endures, who brings suffering, but also bears it himself. From a young age, the boy was unusually clever. He listened to every word, as if he knew that behind simple speech hid secrets. Autolycus taught him the art of cunning, how to turn words against an enemy, how lies can serve the truth, and how wit can be stronger than a sword. His father, Laertes, taught him diligence, manly endurance, and reverence for the gods. When Odysseus was still a youth, his grandfather Autolycus invited him to visit Parnassus, where wild forests rose and cold morning mists lingered. This journey would become fateful for the young hero. It was said that there roamed a massive boar, tearing apart herds and driving shepherds from the mountain paths. Autolycus, an old hunter and master of cunning, said, "Let us see, grandson, how much of you is word, and how much is deed." At dawn, they ventured into the mountains. The forest stood still, only the sound of hooves and the breathing of their hounds pierced the damp air. As the sun rose over the peaks, the beast burst from the thicket, dark, rough, like the wild force of the mountains itself. The ground trembled beneath its steps. Odysseus did not flinch. He hurled his spear, and the shaft pierced the boar's side. The beast lunged forward and, with its tusks, slashed his leg. Blood darkened the grass. The creature fell, and the youth stood pale but unafraid. Autolycus approached, looked at the wound, and spoke quietly. "Remember this mark. It will stay with you, a memory of your courage, and the price that must be paid for it." The scar healed, but remained forever, beneath the knee, uneven, visible. Many years later, this scar would become a defining sign of the hero. Among all the unions recounted in the Chronicles of Hellas, few were as enduring and quietly beautiful as the marriage of Odysseus and Penelope. Their love did not flare suddenly. It grew slowly, like an olive tree whose roots push through stone to hold fast in the earth for centuries. When Odysseus was still a young man, his father sent him to Sparta to seek a bride worthy of heart and mind. There, at the court of King Icarius, he met Penelope, a girl not dazzling, yet of profound beauty. Her eyes did not sparkle like the sunlit sea, but held the calm of water at a quiet shore, transparent, steady, alive. They were married in Sparta, and soon the day of departure came. Icarius did not wish to release his daughter. He stood by the road, unable to contain his anxiety, and said, "Penelope, if you wish to stay, return. If you wish to go, go with your husband." She spoke no words. She only lowered a veil over her face, an ancient sign of choice. Thus, the father understood. His daughter had chosen the path of a wife. They say that he then commanded a stone to be raised by the road, a memorial of the decision where love outweighed kinship, and destiny began in silence. So Penelope went after Odysseus, not for wealth, not out of obedience, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who knows her place is beside the one she has understood with her heart. After marrying Penelope, Odysseus's life in Ithaca should have proceeded peacefully. He became the rightful king of the island, the beloved husband of Penelope, and a caring father to the young Telemachus. Yet fate, as often happens in ancient Greek tales, had other plans for him. When news of the Trojan War reached the shores of Greece, Odysseus had no desire to leave for a foreign war driven by someone else's ambitions. He wanted to stay home, with his family, within the familiar walls of his house, and so he devised a clever, though dubious plan. He feigned madness. He sowed salt on the fields, yoked oxen to the plough, but acted in every way contrary to what one would expect of a future hero. Only the wise King Palamedes saw through the ruse and exposed Odysseus, for even the most skillful pretense could not hide true courage. On the battlefield, Odysseus proved himself not only as a warrior, but also as a strategist, whose plans shaped the fate of entire nations. He was the one who proposed the ingenious plan of the Trojan horse, a wooden beast in which Greece's finest warriors were hidden. This deception led the Greeks to victory, destroyed the walls of Troy, and forever inscribed Odysseus's name into legend. His mind was a weapon as formidable as a sword, and his cunning a blade capable of deciding war without unnecessary losses. Yet with victory came a new trial. Odysseus's image in Trojan tales became twofold. Some hailed him as the savior of Greece, others saw a deceitful trickster, using the suffering of others merely as a tool for fame. This combination of genius and cunning set the stage for all the events that followed in his life. His return home, his wanderings, and the eternal conflict between duty, intellect, and conscience. When the walls of Troy fell and fire consumed the once proud city of Priam, the Greek kings began their return to their homes. All hoped that after 10 years of bloodshed, the sea would become a path of peace and homecoming. But for Odysseus, the journey home became the longest and hardest of all. He sailed from Troy with 12 ships, laden with spoils and weary warriors. The wind was favorable, the sea calm, and many believed the gods had forgiven the Greeks for their bloody revenge. Yet clouds of fate were already gathering over Odysseus. The first trial was the land of the Cicones at Ismaros. The Greeks landed, plundered the city, but their greed brought disaster. The inhabitants, gathering allies, attacked from land. Many of Odysseus's men were lost there, the first victims on his endless journey home. Sailing away from Ismaros, Odysseus's ships were caught by storms. The wind drove them to the shores of the lotus eaters, people who fed on the sweet lotus fruit. These fruits brought forgetfulness. Those who tasted them forgot home and the purpose of their journey. Several of Odysseus's men ate the lotus and, as if enchanted, refused to return. Odysseus dragged them back to the ships by force and ordered all to set sail before they forgot who they were. But the greatest trial awaited ahead, the island of the Cyclopes. The island was wild and uninhabited. No laws, no crafts, no agriculture, only stone caves and pastures. The Cyclopes, children of Poseidon, one-eyed giants, lived in solitude, fearless of gods and men alike. Seeking to learn who inhabited this land, Odysseus took 12 of his bravest men, along with a wineskin given to him by the priest Maron. They entered a massive cave, where they saw cheese, sheepskins, and pens full of rams. Odysseus's men urged him to take the food and leave, but their leader, driven by curiosity and pride, decided to wait for the owner. When the sun declined, Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, appeared, a giant with a single eye in his forehead. He herded the sheep, rolled a massive stone into the cave, so heavy that 10 ships could not have moved it, and noticing the men, asked roughly, "Who are you, and why have you come? Merchants? Thieves?" Odysseus replied that they were Greeks returning from Troy, asking for hospitality under Zeus's law. But Polyphemus only laughed. "Cyclopes, fear no Zeus. I am above the gods myself." Seizing 2 Greeks, he smashed them against the stone and ate them. Terror gripped the rest, but Odysseus held back his cry and devised a plan. The next day, when Polyphemus went out to pasture his sheep again, Odysseus carved a stake from olive wood, sharpened it, and hid it in dung so the giant would not see it. When Polyphemus returned, Odysseus offered him wine. The Cyclops drank, demanded more, and staggering asked, "What is your name, man?" "Nobody," answered Odysseus. Polyphemus smirked. "So nobody will kill you last. Nobody I will eat last." He fell asleep, and then Odysseus and his companions drove the heated stake into the monster's single eye. Polyphemus screamed so that the whole island trembled. Other Cyclopes ran to see who had harmed him, and he, weeping, cried out, "Nobody! Nobody has blinded me!" Believing that a god had sent him this affliction, the others dispersed. In the morning, blind, Polyphemus released his sheep, feeling their backs to find the men. Odysseus had tied his companions under the rams and escaped last himself. When the ships sailed away from the shore, he could not resist and shouted, "If anyone asks who blinded you, say, Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." This was a fatal mistake. Polyphemus raised his hands to the sky and called to his father, "Poseidon, lord of the seas, punish Odysseus. Let him not return home soon, but through torment and suffering, losing all his companions." And Poseidon heard. From that day, the sea became Odysseus's enemy. Winds confused his paths, waves rose like walls, and ships sank one by one. Thus began a decade-long journey filled with trials, monsters, and temptations. The path of a hero granted wisdom by the gods, but denied rest. For a long time, the stormy waters, cursed by Poseidon's wrath, tossed Odysseus's ships from shore to shore. But one day, when the sea finally calmed, an island appeared before the travelers, shining in the sunlight like a floating hill of copper and gold. This was the island of Aeolia, the domain of Aeolus, ruler of all winds and favourite of the Olympian gods. Aeolus lived with his 6 sons and 6 daughters, whom he married to each other to preserve peace and harmony in the family. His palace was surrounded by high copper walls, and guards stood at the gates to ensure that the winds could not escape without the will of their master. In the air, there was neither storm nor turbulence. Everything breathed tranquility, and only the gentle west wind, Zephyr, stirred the sea around the island. When Odysseus's ships dropped anchor at the shore, the Lord of the Winds greeted them warmly. He knew of the hero's fame, his cunning, and his sufferings. For a whole month, Odysseus and his companions were guests in Aeolus's palace, enjoying a peace and quiet they had almost forgotten. Finally, it was time to set sail. Aeolus, moved by Odysseus's honesty and prudence, decided to help him return home. He gave the hero an extraordinary gift, a bag made from a bull's hide, bound with a silver cord. Inside this bag contained all the unruly winds that could hinder the voyage. Aeolus released only the gentle west wind, so that it would softly drive the ships toward the shores of Ithaca. Before departure, Aeolus warned strictly, "Guard this bag, Odysseus. Let no one touch it. Only then will the sea obey you." With gratitude and joy, Odysseus accepted the gift. For 7 days and nights, the ships sped over calm waters, so close to Ithaca that the travellers could already make out the smoke of hearths and the scent of familiar lands. Odysseus's heart trembled with happiness. At last, he would see Penelope, Telemachus, his home, and the olive groves. But fate smiled wryly once more. While Odysseus, exhausted from sleepless nights, dozed on the deck, his companions were seized by suspicion. They whispered among themselves, eyeing the mysterious bag at their leader's feet. He must have hidden gold and silver from Aeolus inside. He kept it all for himself and gave us nothing, they muttered. Greed overcame loyalty. One of them untied the bag, and immediately, with a roar, all the winds of the world burst forth. North, south, east. Each struggled to break free first, colliding and intertwining, raising the sea to the heavens. The ship spun, masts cracked, sails tore to shreds. In an instant, everything they had travelled in 9 days was destroyed. The storm hurled them back to Aeolus's island. When Odysseus, exhausted and desperate, set foot again on Aeolia, the Lord of Winds came out and asked grimly, "What are you doing here, son of Laertes? Did I not give you a path home?" Odysseus recounted the misfortune, human folly, and his helplessness. But Aeolus shook his head and replied, "If the gods, especially Poseidon, hate you, I cannot help. Leave. No power of the winds can alter the will of the gods." Thus, Odysseus, deprived of the last hope for a swift return, once again set out into the open sea, without guidance, without protection, with despair in his heart. And the sea, obedient to Poseidon, rose like a wall once more. For many weeks they wandered among the grey waters until land appeared on the horizon, harsh, rocky, with a narrow bay where the sea entered the land like the jaws of a monster. 2 sheer cliffs guarded the entrance, barely allowing one ship to pass. This was the land of the Laestrygonians, unknown even to the oldest sailors. At first, nothing foretold disaster. Cautious after all their trials, Odysseus did not steer his ship into the narrow harbour. He dropped anchor at the entrance and sent 11 other ships inside. He himself chose 3 companions and landed to scout the area. They were met by a strange silence. No birds, no people, only high mountains and unfamiliar shadows moving on the rocks. They walked along a road paved with rough stones and soon saw a girl at a well, tall, with copper-coloured skin and enormous hands. She was the daughter of Antiphates, king of the Laestrygonians, and silently pointed the way to the palace. But this palace was no house of hospitality. As the travellers entered, the queen appeared, huge as a tower, with a face twisted by malice and hunger. Her eyes gleamed, and without a word, she called her husband. From the inner chambers like a storm came Antiphates, a giant twice the height of a man. He grabbed one of Odysseus's companions, lifted him like a bird, and with a crunch tore into his flesh. The other 2 ran toward the ships, but the flight turned into a nightmare. From houses, rocks, and caves, from everywhere, the Laestrygonians emerged. They were giants, grotesque, with fangs and arms longer than spears. Some carried stones, others spears, and upon seeing the ships in the harbour, began hurling rocks at them, like children throwing pebbles at seagull nests. The roar was terrifying. The sea boiled with blood and screams. One by one, Odysseus's ships sank. People tried to flee, but the giants impaled them with spears like fish, dragging them from the water and into their mouths. Only one ship, the one at the entrance of the bay, Odysseus's own, managed to escape. It cut its moorings, and while the waves swirled around the bodies of the dead, the ship slid away from that cursed shore. When the last cries faded, Odysseus stood on deck, silent, hands frozen on the oar. Of the 12 ships that had left Troy, only one remained. The wind carried them onward, and the silence around was heavier than any storm. He knew that new trials awaited ahead. but now he felt that behind every island could lie death. Thus they sailed to the next island, quiet, green, shrouded in light smoke. After the horrors of the land of the Laestrygonians, when Odysseus was left with only one ship and his surviving companions, the sea finally calmed. The wind whispered gently of a land without storms, without fearsome giants, and the travellers felt a fleeting relief. Soon they reached the island of Aiaia, where Circe, daughter of Helios, the sun god, lived. The island was extraordinarily beautiful. Tall forests stretched to the horizon. Flowers shimmered in all the colours of the rainbow, and the air was as sweet as honey. Smoke rose from chimneys on the mountain slopes, and the scents of herbs, spices, and unknown perfumes mingled with the salty sea breeze. On this island there was no fear, only mystery and temptation. Odysseus and his companions set foot on the shore, filled with cautious curiosity. They were greeted by Circe, tall, with long hair of sunlit gold, eyes like a green forest lake, full of charm and power. She smiled kindly, and her voice sounded like music. "Welcome, travellers. Fear not my home, but behind this hospitality lay danger." Circe was a mistress of magic, skilled in casting spells, transforming humans into animals, and altering fates. She invited Odysseus's companions into her home, offering wine and food that were enchanted. Anyone who tasted them would lose their mind. Several brave warriors, unaware of the trap, ate the food, and in an instant their bodies began to change. Their hands and feet were covered in hair, their noses elongated into snouts, their eyes took on the expression of animals, and they were transformed into pigs. They screamed and tried to resist, but the spell was stronger. Only Odysseus, armed with wisdom and caution, escaped this fate. He had received counsel from Hermes, the god and messenger between mortals and gods, to take the magical herb moly, which would protect him from the sorceress's spells. With its aid, he entered Circe's house, ready to save his companions. When the sorceress attempted to enchant Odysseus, he raised the mole, and her magic had no effect. He threatened her with his sword, and Circe, struck by his courage and willpower, softened. Odysseus secured the release of his men, and they regained their human forms. Circe, now no longer an enemy but an ally, offered the guests to stay with her for a year. Here, Odysseus and his companions regained strength, rested, and prepared for the journey ahead. After a long stay on Circe's island, Odysseus, following her advice, understood that before continuing his journey home, he needed to descend into the underworld, the realm of the dead, a world of shadows where the souls of the departed dwell, where darkness reigns, but where one can learn the will of the gods and the fate of the future. Circe told him the precise ritual. The night was silent and black, like a bottomless abyss, when Odysseus approached the shore of the underworld. The wind did not blow, the water stood still, as if nature itself held its breath. He dug a trench in the sand, poured the sacrificial blood of sheep, and on the horizon appeared trembling pale shadows, like smoke above a fire. At first, Odysseus heard only whispers, thousands of voices entwined in a dreadful song of suffering and death. Suddenly, Elpenor, his comrade from Troy who had fallen at the city walls, appeared before him. He was semi-transparent, trembling, barely able to speak. "Odysseus, you have come here alive, and we, forever in the earth." Elpenor's words pierced the hero's heart. He reached out but could not touch his friend. The shadow vanished, dissolving into the air, leaving only cold and sorrow behind. Then Odysseus saw his mother, Anticlea. She looked as if her very form had shrunk from grief. He fell to his knees. "Mother, I will return. I promise." But her eyes, full of sadness, reflected years of loneliness and worry. An embrace could not bring her back to life. Odysseus felt despair, but his willpower held back his tears, for further trials awaited. Finally, he met Tiresias, the blind prophet whose gaze seemed to see everything at once, past, present, and future. Tiresias spoke calmly, but every word sounded like a judgment. Poseidon's wrath is inevitable. You will lose all your companions but yourself. You will return home to Ithaca only after long wanderings. Spirits of hatred and fate will follow you, and your wife Penelope and son Telemachus will be the hope for which you will fight. Odysseus listened, his heart tightening, but he understood. Prophecy is not a verdict, but a path. Before him stretched a long, thorny road, full of storms, monsters, and magic. The souls of heroes of the past, Achilles, Agamemnon, Ajax, appeared and vanished, each instructing Odysseus, each leaving a shadow of bitterness and a lesson in his heart. Glory is dead without wisdom, and intellect saves where strength is powerless. When the ritual ended, Odysseus returned once more to the land of the living. He straightened, feeling the weight of fate and, at the same time, lightness. Now he knew what awaited him. Before his eyes lay even more terrifying obstacles: Scylla and Charybdis, the sirens, and finally, his native Ithaca. Yet in Odysseus's heart arose a firm resolve to endure all trials and return home, despite the wrath of the gods and the deaths of his companions. Night fell over the sea, darker than the blackest ink. The waves whispered softly, but even in this calm, danger lurked. Odysseus's ship slowly approached a rocky island, home to the most cunning creatures of legend, the sirens. At first, they did not appear. Only a thin rustle of wings glided over the water, and a strange enchantment hung in the air. Then a voice sounded, so sweet that Odysseus's heart froze. It called him, promising all the secrets of the world, every victory, every treasure, every forgotten joy. Odysseus, son of Laertes, come, learn what fate hides. Listen to me. The voice was honeyed, but honey mixed with poison. Each note pierced the mind, and Odysseus felt his legs tremble, his hands stretched toward the water. His eyes widened, his heart pounded wildly. He realized that any companion, even the strongest, would instantly drown in this sweet madness. He shouted an order, "Plug my men's ears with wax!" They obeyed silently, but Odysseus himself wanted to hear. He commanded that he be tied to the mast. The voice roared and his body strained, hands clutching the ropes, feet stamping, every muscle burning from resistance. Yet his heart, mind, and body were bound. The sirens circled the ship, hovering on the rocks, their bodies composed of both light and darkness, eyes blazing, hands reaching, hair curling around the masts as if to seize Odysseus and drag him into the depths. He screamed, begged to be released, each breath bitter, every heartbeat like a hammer upon his temples. The ship sailed through death. Each wave seemed nearly the last. Odysseus felt as if his brain would explode from the sweet voice, from promises of eternal glory, from the temptation to throw himself into the sea. His companions, ears blocked with wax, sat like statues, silently holding the sails. And then the song ceased. The rocks were left behind, the air was heavy again, but free of enchantments, and the sea was ordinary once more. Odysseus collapsed onto the deck, trembling, drenched, with a pulse that seemed to scream. He had survived, but had nearly lost his mind. Every beauty can be deadly, he whispered to himself. Every desire is a trap for the weak heart. This episode taught the hero that in the world there are neither illusions nor accidents. Behind every temptation, even the most beautiful, lurks death. Only wit, cunning, and self-control can save a person in a world where even nature itself is ready to consume the traveler. After Odysseus miraculously survived the siren's enchantment, the sea seemed hostile once more. The wind carried the ship between dark cliffs, and the waters below churned and boiled like a cauldron. Before them lay a narrow strait, a corridor of death, flanked by two legendary threats, Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla was a dreadful sea monster with 6 hungry heads, each capable of snatching a man in a single motion. Her body was pressed into the cliff, but the heads jutted above the water, swaying on long necks, eyes glowing with ravenous fire. Each time the ship drew near, she hissed, producing a sound that chilled to the bone. Charybdis, by contrast, was invisible, but her power was immediately felt, a giant whirlpool that sucked into its depths anything that came too close. The waters around her swirled in spirals, forming a black vortex that could instantly engulf a ship. Odysseus understood, one cannot defeat both forces. One must choose the lesser evil. He prayed inwardly, gripped the helm tightly, and told himself, better to lose a few men than the entire ship and all the crew. I will pass, but at the cost of suffering. As the ship approached the strait, Scylla suddenly leapt from the cliff like a nightmare from the deep. Her 6 heads snatched 6 of the best warriors, men Odysseus considered almost like sons. Their screams tore through the air, their bodies vanished into the monster's maw, and the water ran red with blood. Odysseus could do nothing. Each head moved faster than mortal hands, each grasp precise and deadly. Meanwhile, Charybdis drew the ship toward her whirlpool. Odysseus shouted commands, steering with incredible precision, dodging the vortex, almost touching the edge of the abyss that could swallow the entire ship. His heart pounded as if it would burst. His hands burned from strain, eyes stung from tears and salty spray. Minutes stretched into eternity. Waves crashed against the hull. The cries of his companions, already mourning the fallen, tore at his ears, and Scylla again revealed her heads, demanding new victims. Odysseus held the helm firmly, steering as close as possible to the cliff to avoid Charybdis's sucking jaws. Thus, with grief and horror but having preserved the ship, he passed between the monsters. 6 companions were lost, their names and faces etched forever in Odysseus's memory. When the threat faded behind the stern, the sea seemed calm, yet the hero's heart pounded anxiously, and his hands trembled from the exertion. He knew every victory comes at a terrible cost, and the journey was far from over. Every decision is a choice between death and loss, and in these seas there is no mercy, Odysseus thought, gazing at the dark cliffs where the monsters lurked. After this battle, Odysseus realized that sometimes, to survive, one must lose those they love and accept horrors beyond control. The seas were no longer just a path home. They had become an endless trial of mind, strength, and heart. After the terrifying strait between Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus's ship and the remnants of his crew struggled against tired winds, hunger, and the bitterness of loss. The hero's heart ached for home, but another trap awaited them, one of the deadliest yet, the island of Helios, the sun god. When the ship approached the island's shores, Odysseus immediately sensed an unusual silence. The land was hot, as if the sun never left it. The cliffs shimmered with gold, and the grasses and trees exhaled the scents of honey and resin. The air carried a warm, almost tangible power. This was the home of the sun god, a sanctuary no mere mortal dared to tread upon. Along the cliffs, grazing were enormous cows and bulls with golden horns and gleaming coats. This was the sacred herd of Helios, forbidden to humans. Their breath seemed like a gentle warmth, and their eyes reflected the sun itself. Odysseus strictly forbade his companions from touching the animals, reminding them of the god's wrath and the fate of those who dared disobey. Days passed, and fatigue and despair grew aboard the ship. The vessel rested in the harbour. Food was running out, and the crew, tormented by hunger, began whispering and glancing at the gleaming cattle. Odysseus sensed their fear and doubts, tried to maintain order, but inside he felt a bitter anxiety, a premonition of disaster. One day, while Odysseus slept after a long day, his companions, driven by greed and desperation, dared to commit a terrible act. They slaughtered the sacred bull, thinking that by doing so, hunger would be relieved and life saved. They roasted the meat over an open fire, laughing, forgetting the prohibition. But the island came alive immediately. The air trembled, the earth quaked, and from the sky came the furious roar of Helios. "Who dared touch my cattle?" The gods did not leave this sin unpunished. That very night, lightning flashed over the sea, and the ships that had eaten the sacred cattle began to sink. Companions fell into the water, their cries mingling with the roar of the waves. Odysseus watched his friends perish, feeling helpless and horrified. He could only silently hold the helm, saving the ship and himself, the last one destined to continue the journey. By morning, Odysseus was alone on the remaining ship. His head spun from bitterness, his heart tore from grief. He looked at the island, still smouldering with fire, and realized that the wrath of the gods was unyielding, and even the wisest decisions could be destroyed by human weakness. Thus, having lost all remaining companions, he set out to sea alone, with a single goal: to reach Ithaca. Each day ahead would now be a trial, where only cunning, patience, and indomitable will could save him from ultimate destruction. After the horrors of Helios's island and the death of all his companions, Odysseus sailed alone, emaciated and exhausted. His body struggled with tired arms and sunburned skin, and his mind fought despair. The sea beneath him was black as pitch, and every stroke of the oar felt like a heroic feat. Suddenly, green land appeared on the horizon, surrounded by clear water, as if the sky itself had fallen to earth. This was the island of Calypso, the nymph whose beauty and mastery of magic were legendary. When Odysseus set foot on the shore, he felt a strange calm. A gentle breeze played with his hair, the scent of flowers and fresh leaves filled his lungs, and the water at the shore was so clear and warm that he wanted to immerse himself forever. Before him appeared Calypso, tall, with hair the colour of sunset and eyes like the green sea, full of power and seduction. She smiled, and her voice was like a song. "Odysseus, son of Laertes, weary wanderer, come and stay with me. Here you will know no sorrow. Here you will forget suffering and misfortune." She showed him her palace, built of coral and pearl, with gardens of everlasting flowers and springs of water that granted youth and strength. Everything seemed like paradise, designed for immortal comfort. Calypso fed him, dressed him in soft garments, offered him immortal life, and promised the peace that humans rarely see. But in Odysseus's heart lived longing for home. Every evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, he gazed at the distant waters, thinking of Penelope, his son Telemachus, and his native Ithaca. The nymph tried to console him, urging him to forget everything and dissolve into her world. She whispered, "Why seek that land of sorrow and hardship? Here you will be happy forever." But Odysseus resisted. Each day, the internal conflict tore him apart. The desire for rest and immortality clashed with the pull of home, with duty and love for his family. He wandered the island, touched the coral walls of the palace, sat by the fires, listened to birds and the wind. But his heart demanded only one thing: Ithaca. Years passed like moments. Odysseus increasingly thought of escape. He built small rafts, studied currents, observed the winds, and made careful plans. Finally, after 7 long years, when the gods of Olympus intervened and ordered Calypso to release the hero, she, bitter yet respectful, helped him construct a raft, providing provisions and tools. Before his departure, Calypso said, "Perhaps you have lost me, mortal, but I have taught you patience and endurance. Your journey will be long, but remember what freedom costs." And Odysseus, exhausted but filled with determination, set sail on his raft. The waves embraced him, the wind carried him toward Ithaca, and in his mind he already saw the familiar shores, the olive groves, and the face of Penelope. Every stroke of the oar was heavy, but a heart full of home gave him strength. Calypso's island was left behind, but the lessons of the nymph remained forever. Endurance, the ability to resist temptation, and the unbreakable will to achieve one's goal. These alone saved Odysseus, transforming him from a cunning strategist into a true hero. After the terrible trials, the deaths of all his companions, and many long years of wandering, Odysseus found himself on the shores of Phaeacia, the land ruled by King Alcinous and Queen Arete. His body was emaciated, his skin sunburned, his muscles trembling from exhaustion, and his mind burdened by the horrors he had endured. He could barely stand when Nausicaa, the king's daughter, noticed him while she had come to the river with her companions. Seeing his gaunt body and eyes full of suffering, Nausicaa immediately understood that he was no ordinary wanderer. She helped him reach the palace where the king and queen received him. The palace was luxurious yet cozy, walls with carvings, golden ornaments, the scent of spices and fresh food. For the first time in years, Odysseus felt a sense of calm and genuine hospitality. There, he recounted his entire story about the Trojan War, the invention of the Trojan horse, the Cyclopes, the sirens, sorceresses, monsters, and the wrath of the gods. Each word brought to life for the listeners the horror and grandeur of his journeys. The Phaeacians listened with astonishment and awe, and King Alcinous, struck by Odysseus's wisdom and courage, resolved to help him return home. The Phaeacians provided him with the finest ship and crew, and Odysseus, full of hope, set sail once more. After long years of trials, he finally felt that home had become a reality, that native Ithaca was near, and that all that remained was to cover the last miles. When Odysseus arrived in Ithaca, he understood that appearing immediately would ruin his chance to know the truth. Disguised as a poor wanderer, with clothes smeared in dirt, a beard, and broken travel utensils, he stepped onto his native land. His heart contracted with anxiety. How would Penelope greet him? Was she faithful? What awaited him at home? One of the first to encounter him personally was Eurycleia, Odysseus's loyal nurse, who had raised him since childhood. She recognized him when she began washing the feet of the poor wanderer, and noticed the scar on his leg, acquired during a hunting trip when Odysseus was young. Her hands trembled, her eyes filled with tears, and her heart sensed a miracle. "Master, is it you? My son, my lord?" Eurycleia barely managed to whisper, clutching his hand. Odysseus made her keep the secret. He did not want even the most loyal servants to betray him to the suitors. Eurycleia swore to guard this secret until the hero himself decided to act. Then he wandered through the palace, observing the suitors who dared to claim the throne and Penelope's hand. They laughed, ate, and drank, unaware that the true master of Ithaca was present among them. Odysseus assessed each one, noting their habits and weaknesses, preparing for the decisive moment. Penelope, wise and cautious, devised a test for the suitors. They had to string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 rings arranged along the hall. None of the suitors, no matter how strong, could manage it. The bow resisted, arrows slipped, and their hands shook. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, a mix of anger and curiosity. When the turn came to the poor wanderer, Odysseus, He strung the bow effortlessly. The arrow whistled quietly as it passed through all the rings, sounding like a bell, and everyone in the hall realized that this was the true master of Ithaca. In an instant, Odysseus tore off the beggar's clothing, drew his sword, and began punishing the suitors. The battle was furious and swift, every strike precise and deadly. He used cunning, strength, and skill to justly punish all those who had insulted his home and family. After the victory, Odysseus met Telemachus, his son, who had grown up without a father, but was already wise and brave. Together they eliminated the remaining threats in the palace, and then Odysseus finally met Penelope. She was cautious. Years of wandering, rumors of her husband's death, and the cunning of mortals had taught her not to trust miracles blindly. She decided to test his mind and memory before accepting him again. Penelope asked the servants to clear the hall and began speaking to him as if he were an ordinary stranger. She asked questions about the home, family, and details of Odysseus's life that only he and she could know. She mentioned their bed, crafted by Odysseus from a living olive tree, a detailed secret to everyone else. Odysseus described this secret sign with such precision that Penelope realized she was facing no stranger but her own husband. Tears filled her eyes. Her long years of waiting, fears and doubts were replaced with joy and relief. "It really is you, my Odysseus," she whispered, embracing him as he trembled from exhaustion and emotion. Such proof was necessary, for during his absence Odysseus had been only a shadow in the eyes of the people and the suitors. Only secret knowledge, known only to him and Penelope, could confirm his authenticity. Thus, after long years of suffering, trials, and death, Odysseus was reunited with Penelope and Telemachus, reclaiming his throne and home, restoring justice, and completing the epic of his incredible journey. The palace was once again filled with peace. Yet within the hero there was no lightness. In his heart remained the shadow of losses, the memory of fallen friends, destroyed ships, monsters, and gods who tested his will. He looked at the familiar walls of Ithaca and understood that the journey he had taken had made him a different man. Odysseus was clever, cunning, determined and brave, and therein lay his greatness. He survived where the strong and valiant had fallen because he knew how to plan, wait, deceive, and adapt. He devised the Trojan horse, endured Cyclopes, Sirens, Charybdis and Scylla, Calypso's captivity, and the loss of companions, all to return home. But a question arises. Was he a hero in the pure sense, or were his exploits simply meant to achieve a personal goal? On one hand, Odysseus performed heroic deeds, saved lives, even if not all, demonstrated courage and perseverance, and displayed intelligence and strategy. His decisions often saved lives, and his cunning allowed him to triumph over monsters and gods. He inspires as a figure of survival, intellect, and courage in the face of the impossible. On the other hand, many of his actions were pragmatic and self-centered. He lost companions in pursuit of his own return, deceived friends and enemies, and used people as means to an end. His heroism is intertwined with personal gain, and sometimes it is doubtful whether he was a moral hero or a brilliant pragmatist willing to traverse blood and deceit for home and family. In the end, Odysseus is a human hero, not a perfect one. He symbolizes the drive toward home, family, and a goal, but that goal justifies cunning, bravery, and sacrifice. He is not a saint, but he is the one who endured where others fell and returned to restore justice. And perhaps therein lies his greatest lesson. Heroism is not always pure. It is complex, mixed with ego, fear, and cleverness. Yet it can still change destinies and execute justice. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel. Give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss new videos.